All right. So it's come to this. I'm covering every single champion. I'm going to be giving 5 tips to every champion, and we are getting down to the last few, the more difficult champions that I am very, very hesitant to recommend to some of my subscribers because they are going to be a bit more challenging. Anything, I'd say, even in Diamond and below, the Nidalees are just absolutely terrible. But we've gotten to this point where I want to put out this video to help out some of the people that might be some aspiring Nidalee players. I want you guys to have a good understanding of the things that you're going to have to step in before jumping into this champion. Now, I would say you need 3 qualifications before picking up this champion. If you're looking to climb with it, if you're expecting to climb with it, if you just want to have fun, play it whatever. You play it top with Triforce and just go and auto attack people to death. But if you're really seriously looking to climb right now and you want a high skill expressive champion, Nidalee can be the champion for you. You need to have low ping. You need to be 60 below, 50 below, 40 below almost to just perform at an extremely high level with Nidalee. Next up, you need to be better than the average player in your ELO and micro. If you're consistently getting outplayed on a micro level, I would encourage you to run as far away from Nidalee as possible and go into things like Warwick and Xin Zhao, where you can just stat check people and really use your game knowledge to beat them. Third, you're going to need a lot of time to commit, and you're going to have to be one of those people that really like one-tricking champions. She's one of those champions that really thrive when they have a player base and when the player is playing a lot of that one particular champion, similar to Yasuo and Riven. So, with that big disclaimer out of the way, let's get into my top 5 tips for this champion. I encourage you guys, since I'm a bit limited with this format, to put your own tips down below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. So, I put timestamps every single point in my video. There's going to be a skip intro at the top, and there is for every tip where you can just go to the next tip, as well as the bottom. There's going to be a segmented bar where you are able to just fast forward to the next tip if you already have a good understanding of the concept that I am covering in that particular tip. If you want to contact me directly, you can hit me up in Discord. That's going to be linked in the pinned comments. You can follow me on Twitch. It's going to be there as well. And with all that out of the way, guys, let's get into tip number 1 for Nidalee. I can't believe I'm making this video. Alright, and jumping into tip number 1, where you're going to give a couple tips to help your overall spear accuracy when playing Nidalee. This is going to be an extremely important concept to understand because it is equivalent to things like a blitz being able to land a blitzcrank Q. It is absolutely imperative that you are able to land this skill shot at a decent rate if you are looking to carry the early game. So, I want to go over a little bit about this indicator. It is very, very unforgiving. It is quite a skinny skill shot. It is not going to do any latching on like any hook shots that you might see or any of the more wider skill shots. As you can see here, when I throw it out, it misses. It is about maybe a couple of units off of the target. When I throw it right there, it is going to hit. When I just skew it maybe a little bit over that way, it is going to hit, and then just a little bit over from 1 or 2 units, it is going to miss. So be very careful when throwing it off and really try and narrow it down to a very small target. You want to aim small, and you'll miss small when playing Nidalee. Next up, you want to hide your spear in terrain as much as possible. If the least time they have of seeing your skill shot, the less time they are going to have to react. As opposed to throwing it straight from lane, they are knowing that you are throwing the skill shot from right there. But the more time it is just traveling over terrain, the better it is going to be. So with this concept in mind, Nidalee is so much stronger inside of the jungle. True to her theme and being this jungle cat type character, she is going to be able to hit more spears because she is throwing them more from Fog of War in general, because it is going to be less warded and there are no minions around giving vision of the spear. So that will wrap up tip number 1. And guys, if you have any questions with any of these tips, please hit me up in the comments. I'd love to help you out. Alright, and jumping into tip number 2 for Nidalee, we have to really hit home here that Nidalee is an assassin snowball champion, and how you augment that kind of champion is through two things: vision denial and coming from unexpected angles. So vision denial is achieved through the Oracle lens and through the control ward. The worst thing you could do is by trying to sit in a bush waiting for people to come and get you, but they have it warded and they see you there and they're just completely avoiding that area, making you fall further behind from CS and not allowing any kills. So Oracle lens and the control wards are absolutely imperative for you when you are playing Nidalee. Second, coming from unexpected angles is going to be extremely crucial for Nidalee, because she's going to first be able to land more spears. Second, she's going to be able to get in better position when targeting the enemies. So how you want to look to play this out from coming from unexpected angles. And first, let's talk about lane phase. One of the most unexpected ganks in lower elo is doing a lane gank. Nidalee really exceeds at lane ganks because she moves extremely quick through the brush and gets a massive movement speed towards targets that are within 1400 range. As you can see here, 490 movement speed when facing towards this enemy, and it goes all the way down to 439 when facing away. So this is going to be extremely important to understand that you're able to chase in and get in really quickly, but it might be a little bit more difficult for you to get out. Second, when you are not in lane phase and you are looking for assassinations and for picks, it is extremely important again for vision control and coming from unexpected angles. This can be achieved quite easily by hopping over walls with your W and getting behind the enemy for those easier spears, again hiding it in the terrain as much as possible and getting those really long range spears that chunk out the enemies. So with all that out of the way, I'll wrap up tip number 2. Alright, and getting into tip number 3 for Nidalee, you have to understand that she has a very unique playstyle that is only true of her and a couple of other harder to execute junglers. The reason why they're hard to execute is because it relies a lot on the input and your play and your pathing and your overall game knowledge in the early game to understand what you need to be doing and where your strengths are. Your strengths rely quite heavily on your ability to clear the jungle quite quickly, as well as to move around in the jungle quite quickly using things like your prow, using things like your aspect of the cougar jump, and really start just shredding your jungle and then affecting the rest of the map. So you want to be eating up as much resources when you play Nidalee. Be as greedy as possible when playing her, particularly if you're in a lower elo and you feel like you are hitting one of those prerequisites with Nidalee of being better on a micro level than the other champions. So really need to take advantage of her dueling potential as well. You do not want to get yourself in a position where you are farming equal with something like a Sejuani or an Amumu that is just going to provide a better front line, going to provide more scaling, and you are not snowballing the early and mid game. So make sure that you are at least getting a lot more CS than the enemy jungler and pushing that lead into the enemy. So how you can look to do this as well is you have a quicker clear time than the enemy jungler. You want to look to invade because of your decent dueling potential in the early game. And again, the last thing you want to do is get caught on vision and just sit there for a bit. So setting up traps on important buffs is going to be quite important, and control wards are literally worth their weight in gold when playing Nidalee. So please make sure that you understand this playstyle and what you're getting into before you start picking up Nidalee, because it can be really fun and fast paced, but it can be quite tilting. I'd say that Nidalee players are probably 2 or 3% more likely to AFK games because of really bad teams, and they get tilted and they're not able to carry the early and mid game because it gets super frustrating in the late game. And that will wrap up this tip. Alright, and getting into tip number 4 with Nidalee. Now, I know I've been covering this concept a lot in a lot of my videos, but it is extremely true of Nidalee, particularly in her early game reliance on ganking. And this is understanding strong and weak side. Your ability to chase further and to get away quicker is obviously going to be a lot better with the skinny wall side, and it is going to be a lot worse when you're unable to jump and follow without flashing over this really big wall. If you didn't know, they are both inverted on the other side. So the skinny wall is going to be for the blue side, and the red side is going to have the fatter wall on that. as well as when you go to the top side, the skinny wall is going to be here, and the bot side, the skinny wall, is going to be here. So being aware of that is really going to enable you to do a couple things. It's going to allow you to be a lot more offensive and look for more picks because you have a decent fallback strategy where you aren't able to be chased as efficiently as you would be in other situations. So always keep this in the back of your mind when playing Nidalee. Another small thing, if you are just starting to pick up Nidalee, you should be going into a practice tool before a game and know every single wall that you can jump over in the W. This is going to be extremely important, particularly around objectives. I don't know how many times when I was leveling up some of my Smurfs and ranking up my Smurfs that I just see a Nidalee just jump like, oh, I can totally jump over this really, really fat wall. You have to know exactly where you can look to W over the walls, and this is going to help you with your overall clear efficiency as well as your ability to chase and get away. So understanding the areas and the different walls where you can W over is going to be just an extremely important thing to just jump into the practice tool and put in a decent amount of time and get in to a really good point where you don't pause right before the wall like this and then jump over it. It's just a really fluid, smooth thing where you're just jumping over the wall as soon as you get to that point. And that will wrap up this tip for Nidalee. Alright, and getting into the final tip for Nidalee, we are going to be talking about team fighting. This is probably where a lot of newer Nidalees are going to struggle the absolute most because it is the hardest to execute in comparison to her other play styles of just being very pick reliant and gank reliant. When you get around to the team fights, this is going to be where it is a bit more difficult unless you just have acquired such a massive lead in items where it might be just a slaughter. So there's a couple different concepts I want to cover. First of all, target identification is going to be extremely important. The last thing you would want to do is trade 1-for-1 when you are ahead for a ADC that is 0-6. You've already killed a bunch in the late game when you have so much resources on you. So you always are going to want to identify the target with the most amount of potential value towards the enemy team. Now the reason why I said potential value, it is not about how many kills the enemy has. If it is a Pantheon with 3 items with a bunch of lethality items and he is 8-0, and then there is a 1-1 Jinx with 3 items that are crit items, you really want to focus that Jinx, even if the Pantheon has 8 or 9 kills and the Jinx only has 1, because she is going to provide so much more to the team. So having a really good understanding of the different parts of the game, who is scaling really heavily and who's going to have an overall more impact on the team fight, that is the person that you want to throw all of your damage into, because it is going to provide you the most return on your investment of your abilities and potentially your life if you are jumping in. Second thing I really want to talk to is cooldown window usage. When you are playing Nidalee and you are hopefully better than the average person in your elo on a micro level, you want to look as your allies as just really big dumb meat bags that are going to absorb abilities for you. So important abilities to watch out for would be things like Morgana Q or Nautilus ult, things with a lot of pick potential that are going to prevent you from obtaining your goal of assassinating a high value target. So being in the backline and just looking for Q poke, and for healing your backline ADC, buffing him up with this 60% insane amount of extra attack speed can be an effective way to play out the early amount of team fights. So you need to find the balance of not waiting too late, but also not going in too early and getting turned on. So the last thing that I want to talk about in team fighting is flanks are highly effective for Nidalee. Nidalee might struggle a little bit in front-to-back team fights, but she's extremely effective when causing just a bunch of chaos and getting in from these flank positions and throwing her spears from unexpected spots, similar to what we were talking about in tip number 1, where we are throwing our spears getting covered by the terrain as much as possible. So that will wrap up my tips, guys, for Nidalee. If you have any questions for me, you can hit me up in the comments down below. And as always, guys, take it easy.